For most of us, this is one of the most well-known parables in the New Testament. Certainly our culture knows the parable of the Good Samaritan. I propose today to shatter most of your ideas of what you think it means, to make sure that what you have always thought is not milquetoast or watered down, easy to just grasp and say, well, that makes sense. Why? Because this teaching, direct from Jesus, is perhaps the most radical words he ever spoke. So we have here much more than we might have thought all these years and learned in Sunday school and associate to when we hear these words. So let me set the context. This parable is a response to the question, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Now, how do we make that real for each of us right now? Because if it doesn't connect where you live, this is a pointless exercise. This is ancient history. This is ritual and empty religion. To inherit eternal life. I know that most of us, wouldn't you agree, are really worried about this life first. So I want to remind you that Jesus actually defines this term eternal life in John 17. Some of you know it. When he says eternal life is to know God and Jesus Christ whom he has sent, to be conscious of the living God, to live in the presence of God, to let God's life flow through us, to let eternity be present in passing time. Transformation from mere worried mortals to people empowered by God's very life, unconditional love, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Now that's another one. I'm not going to spend much time on it, but you'll agree that if it only means to love your neighbor just as selfishly as you love yourself, just as petty, just as self-absorbed, then it has no value. Everybody loves themselves. But if you understand that he is saying, as though this person were yourself, then it's a whole different ball game. To love another in the way that you wish to be cared for, your greatest hopes in this life, your deepest desires and dreams of contentment and fulfillment, to love another that they may know that too. So let us not reduce it to a moral code or to doing good here and there and feeling great about ourselves. Which is why this lawyer, this scribe, this man who knows the sacred laws wants to trick Jesus. Who is my neighbor? Who am I supposed to love with God's love? Because back in Leviticus, they define that love of neighbor. That's where it first comes from. And it doesn't mean everybody. It means your local villager, your cousin, your family, your tribe, your people. It's limited love. And Jesus is the unlimited one. And what he comes to do is to blast through all that is human limitation. So that's the context of what we have here. We're told that a man is going down the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Very dangerous road. Drops from 5,000 feet above sea level to 1,200 below. Lots of nooks and crannies for bandits who've always been around. You might say it's a metaphor for the road of life, the unexpected, the dangers of life. And sure enough, this man going down this solitary, barren place is attacked. He's stripped. They tear off his clothes and they beat him. They don't just beat him, they try to kill him. There's blood everywhere. And they leave him for dead. They leave him in a heap of blood that is sure to die, all alone on that road. Roadkill. That's how they do it. And then the master, in this parable, not a story, not a narrative, a parable, which is all about pointing to something else, which is a conduit to deeper meaning and not a storytelling, says by chance a priest was passing by. The priest was a good man, a man of God, a man who worships Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Jacob, and Isaac, a respected man. And he knows by sacred law that if he goes over to this heap of blood on the road and touches it, he will be made unclean, ritually unclean. He won't be allowed to perform his duties anymore. He can't go back to the temple. He can't approach God. That's a law. It may sound strange to us today, but that was the reality. So he does the right thing. He follows the sacred law. He passes to the other side. And then we're told a Levite comes down. What's a Levite? The tribe of Levi, the high priesthood. You know who was part of that tribe? Moses and Aaron and Ezekiel. They were the ones who were not landowners, for God, in God's self, is what they possessed. The great religious mystics of these holy people. And he too knows that you cannot approach such a mess and not lose contact with God, as it is written. So it's not about people not caring. This is complicated. And you see how we water it down and make it so easy to swallow so we can have a nice little tail. No, but that's just the beginning. Then we hear about a Samaritan, not a good Samaritan, a Samaritan. And I'll remind you, for those of you who haven't heard this before, that the Samaritans were hated by the Jews. Hated for 700 years. Ever since Sargon, if you know that name from ancient history, and the Assyrians took over northern Israel, whom prophet had said that would happen to them because of their idolatry. And deported 25,000 Israelites, brought in 25,000 foreigners, intermingled them. And in that ancient world, to mix bloodlines was like creating mutants. Some of that thinking is still going on, isn't it? Remember the horrible terms of the 80s, the ethnic cleansing? Goes way back to the primitive days. So the Samaritan was an aberration. Not only that, but when the Israelites come back from the Babylonian captivity, the Samaritans try to stop them from rebuilding the Temple of Jerusalem. And they take sides with Alexander the Great, who allows them to build their temple on Mount Gerizim. And they pretend to have the same religion. So they're perverting the religion of the Israelites. Pilgrims, Jewish pilgrims, would go way out of their way so they didn't set foot on Samaritan soil. It was said that if a Jew touched a Samaritan, it would delay the redemption of Israel. Imagine that. It would delay the redemption of the whole nation if you touched one of these half-breeds, outcasts. And that's who Jesus picks. Here we go now. This is where the serious teaching begins. What do we see happen? This no good outcast, this dangerous enemy of God's people, goes to the body bandages it, pours oil and wine on the wounds, picks up this bleeding mess of humanity, puts it on his own horse, and walks for miles to the desert, leaving his horse to carry this man, this stranger whom he does not know. This stranger who, if he came to and found out a Samaritan was caring for him, might kill him. Certainly would be outraged. And then he takes him to an inn and tells the innkeeper to look after him. And he gives him 2 denarii. What is that? 2 days' work. This is not a rich merchant. He's giving him a lot of money to care for this person whom he doesn't know, who probably hates his guts. And he tells the innkeeper, take care of him. When I come back, I'll pay you all the expenses you had to incur by taking care of him. That's a lot of effort, don't you think? Let's consider this. The man may never thank him. The man probably hates Samaritans. He's most likely never going to pay him back. There is no real reason to help this person. In fact, it could have been a trap. If you've seen those movies where someone plays dead, and the person goes to them to help, and suddenly they're swarmed on by the bad guys. You need a movie to see. Book of Eli has a scene like that. So he places himself in danger by doing this. He gives him money that he doesn't have to give. What do you think Mrs. Samaritan is going to say when he comes home, lacking 2 days' pay and more? There's every reason in the world for him to pass to the other side, away from the hated Israelites. He goes beyond reasonable assistance. He could have just bandaged him. He could have just left him at the inn. He goes the extra mile. There's no reward in this for him whatsoever. He breaks the sacred religious rules of both his religion and that of the Jews in order to help. He has no good reason to do this. That image, that effort, that super effort, that unreasonable effort is what Jesus calls loving your neighbor. That's a whole different world than what we usually consider loving your neighbor. What? You're breaking the rules? You're giving him money you don't have? I don't want to do that. How many people want to follow that kind of thinking? Do you see how dramatic it is? And the lawyer has to admit upon being questioned, yes, the man who had mercy on him was his neighbor. And Jesus says, not to the lawyer, but to you and me, you go and do the same. You live a life that is so filled with God's love, because that's the context, inheriting eternal life. You live that love of God in such a way that you will sacrifice beyond your own self-needs and cares for the sake of someone else. Who is willing to do that? Because that is a definition of being a follower of Christ. And we've reduced it to a dinky little, let's be nice for 5 minutes. Let's give somebody a can of food, $2. I'm not going to give them everything in my wallet. And yet, the teaching from the Master's own mouth is to go all the way in an unconditional love for a stranger, getting nothing in return, endangering yourself, and that is called loving your neighbor. That's the religion. That's the revelation that the Holy One brings to us. It breaks all the rules, all the boundaries, and causes us to incarnate the love of God in this world.